Her name was Lainie Williams, and she was a 17-year-old college student who was stabbed to death inside her own home by a yet unnamed assailant in a small, quaint Welsh town called Cefn Fforest near Blackwood. What do we know? What don't we know? We'll go over all of that in today's episode, ladies and gentlemen. Not only that, on the 10th anniversary of the Bataclan, which has just passed, the massacre, there's been some troubling reports that have resurfaced that really go to show the lengths that seemingly government will go to cover up really bad atrocities against their people in the name of diversity, multiculturalism being our greatest strengths. And on that topic, the issue of foreign police officers. All that and more today on Voice of the Valleys. Hi, hello there, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to Voice of the Valleys with your host, your friendly neighbourhood, far-right thug, Mr. George Cresswell. I hope we're all doing well. Hope we're all having a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever we are. I realise I'm hearing slightly different now if I speak into the microphone this way, whereas if I'm looking at you guys over there, it's actually kind of annoying, but I'm at this moment in time, I can't be asked to set up the boom arms. It takes too much time to all disassembled and set up down there from when I had my conversation a little while ago with Justine Winter, where I set everything up downstairs. So apologies about that. Apologies if the audio has been a little bit off in the last couple of episodes. I'm trying to clear it up as best I can. Thank you to the one person so far that I've seen that's commented on one of my posts on X. Not on X, sorry, on YouTube, about, and this is why I wanted to bring this on screen, so this is the one I have at the moment. I think it's quite clear if you listen to the last episode, especially the bit where we talked about the British taxpayer funding the Ethiopian Spice Girls to the tune of over £5 million, it's no surprise that many in the desperation are turning to drink. And I'm making a bit of a joke. I don't have a problem or anything like that. But rather than deal with a potentially burgeoning problem, ladies and gentlemen, I'll leave it up to you to give me some recommendations. This is what I've just gotten, iced off at the moment. It's the Penderyn line. It's the Celt one. I've also had a couple other Penderyn ones, and somebody commented under that post saying Penderyn is absolutely the best, and well, it's Welsh, so of course it is. But I want to know, what's your, if you're a fan of the spice, not that kind of spice, YouTube, what's your favorite? Let me know down in the comments as well, because I've just got to the point now where I go down to the aisle in Tesco's looking for what's on Club Card, but I see all the different pretty bottles and pretty boxes and all of the stuff. And I'm like, what's going to be good? What's the next one that I can try with the little bit of disposable that I have to sort of make things a little bit less bleak on times? But anyway, I'll leave that down to you guys in the comment section. We'll get straight into today's episode. The story that's been really making the rounds at the moment, and I'm going to try as best I can to stay away from speculation as much as possible. I've seen many people talking about this and putting photos up online of what is potentially the assailant, but also potentially not. Is not been revealed yet, so I'm not going to go down showing any photographs of alleged assailants or anything like that. I think I may have, made that mistake, and when I've been hyperbolic in the past, when I was trying to find my feet with this podcast and stuff like that, that's something I might have done. I'm trying to do things a little bit better going forward. I'm trying to make each episode, as I can, a little bit higher quality than the last in terms of how things are reported and all of these things. And even if it means taking a little bit more time to research things and stuff like that, I'm seeing now, looking back on previous times where there's potential things where I could have potentially, things gone a different way, I could have jumped the gun on certain things or whatever, or not researched things as thoroughly as maybe I should have. So when I talk about this first case, which is obviously very fresh in the memory and very, very close to the hearts of a lot of people in communities like mine, because this happens somewhere very, very close, right? I'm not going to go on a speculation train at the moment until we learn more. And so far, this is a time of recording, which is Saturday, the 15th of November at 4:20 in the afternoon. This is what I have, at least in terms of what I've been able to find, is most up to date on this case, which is the tragic case of the murder of 17-year-old Lainie Williams in Cefn Fforest, a small little town in Blackwood, right, in Caerphilly County. And she was stabbed to death by, at the moment, what is still an unnamed assailant, although a 18-year-old, again, just 18-year-old man from Newbridge, which is a neighbouring town about about 10 so minutes away, depending on how easy the drive is, right? It's about I think it's about 5 miles away or thereabouts. That's all we know, that an 18-year-old has been arrested. Don't know anything about him, right, other than he's a man, and that he's residing in Newbridge at the very least. And a lot of people have sort of jumped the gun. Is this one of the usual suspects and stuff like that? Usually, it does seem, at least when characteristics are not reported by the government, it does tend to lean one way, but I'm going to avoid leaning into that speculation for the time being until we know more. What has happened, ladies and gentlemen, is 17-year-old Lainie Williams was stabbed to death in her own home, and it was lucky that her mother wasn't stabbed to death as well. I believe her mother, who was home as well, who was also attacked, is currently in hospital receiving treatment. I'm not sure she's in critical condition, but she's in hospital receiving treatment at this present moment in time. Armed police were called to Cefn Fforest in Blackwood, Wales at around 7:15 a.m. on Thursday. So that would have been the 13th of November, after being told 2 people were seriously injured. The 17-year-old victim, who was Lainie Williams, was pronounced dead at the scene, and a second 38-year-old woman is receiving treatment in hospital. An 18-year-old man, so this is from Sky News, you'll find all the references linked down below as per usual, ladies and gentlemen. An 18-year-old man from Newbridge was arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. The police have also announced, he's in police custody, the police have also announced they are not looking for anybody else in connection with this crime. So the timeline, ladies and gentlemen, of what we have, how it seems to be, is that around 5:30, I'm just going to pull up my timeline of events, just so I can make sure that I don't miss anything at this moment in time. According to the most up-to-date that I can find in terms of the timeline of events, there's been reports that the suspect, whoever he was waiting outside of the house from as early as 5:30 a.m. before entering through an open door and stabbing the victims. It's believed that he was waiting for, I believe, whoever was the male in the house. I believe it was the mother's partner. I'm not sure whether they were married or not, but I believe it was the mother's partner waiting for him to leave for work before then going in and committing this heinous act. Lainie herself was stabbed multiple times in her bedroom whilst trying to fight off the attacker, and was pronounced dead at the scene despite emergency response efforts, including air ambulances. Sadly as well, her 8-year-old brother is reported to have witnessed part of the attack and was told by his mother, to hide under the bed. So I can only imagine what he's going through at this present moment in time. Yeah, some of the things we're going to be talking about today, ladies and gentlemen, you might want to crack open one as well. The injured 38-year-old woman sustained serious stab wounds and was airlifted to hospital, where she continues to receive treatment. Early reports had come in with inconsistencies on her age. Some of them are reporting that she was 56, but the coverage has revealed that she is, in fact, 38. There's a continued police response presence in the area for reassurance. Forensics teams are still currently examining the scene, as far as I know. Obviously, it's been 2 days now, 2.5 days since this incident. And all we know, as I said, about the attacker or the person in custody, the alleged attacker, as I mentioned, the police are not looking for anybody else yet in collusion or in relation to this crime. The 18-year-old from Newbridge was arrested at the scene shortly after during a police raid. He is described as known to the teenage victim, and he currently still remains in custody for suspicion of murder and attempted murder whilst the investigation is ongoing. No motive has yet been publicly disclosed. And that's why I want to shy away from sharing any images that I've seen and anything like that, ladies and gentlemen. I have seen some people sharing that this is the alleged attacker. There's no information on the alleged attacker as of yet. So I'm not going to go and start sharing those victims and saying this is who people are speculating, because I don't want to potentially, drive any undue hatred or undue, threats or fear or anything like that towards people who may not have anything to do with it. Okay, as soon as we have more, we can report on that, and then hopefully we can, hope that the courts will do their job, the police will do their job, and that this will be resolved, and that justice will be done ultimately. But we're going to avoid speculation for the time being. Because there is a question. There is a question, especially that this is how much the media, with its reporting of things selectively and lying by omission and all of these things, and how much they've been shown now to push narratives, how much people are going to jump the gun on these things, especially when, again, whether it's for prejudicing trials or for whatever reason, they don't disclose anything about the alleged perpetrator. Obviously, no charges have been brought or anything like that yet, so that'll probably be when this guy's name is released or whatever, if they're going to bring charges against him. But it's shown when it's done in a blatantly two-tier way. When you have the one clip in the aftermath of Southport, I believe it was, of the guy being hauled off of a plane, I believe it was. The minute he come back on a plane, there was police there to arrest him, and he was put in front of the cameras. And not only his name was put out there straight away, right? His name was put out there straight away. I believe his age was put out there straight away, and his address as well. They basically doxed his family's address. We reported that a good few months ago. So when it's being done in a blatantly two-tier way and people can see it, trust in the media is at an all-time low, despite all the fact that the lefties will say that the trust in institutions like the BBC is the most trusted news organization across the planet. It's not. Trust in, mainstream media could never be, lower. And with the political initiatives that have been put across, it's led people to speculate, and we've got some other examples of other stuff to go over why people speculate in this way as well, ladies and gentlemen. To, again, jump to the assumption that this is somebody who's, let's just say, not of native Welsh stock. And currently, it would seem we do not know that. That's the biggest thing. We do not know that at this current moment in time. And I'll bring this up on screen for you as well now, ladies and gentlemen. This is the area. This is the area itself that this crime would have been committed in on the ONS map. And if we're doing it, say, by ethnicity, assuming that these ONS census maps are reliable. Now, I ran a poll in my live premiere of my conversation with Joe Marsh, and you guys, as well as I agree with the sentiment, expressed a lot of skepticism as to how accurate these maps are. Assuming that they are, however, and that they are potentially, at this present moment in time, the best data that we have to go on, right? They're at least a data point that we can go on. From 2021, the census, when we're breaking it down by, for example, ethnic group, you're looking in this area of the world. I'm going to zoom in slightly. There we are. So this is the area that's called Pengham and Cefn Fforest, this area of Blackwood. And you'll see here, it is extremely, extremely ethnically homogenous if this census data is to be believed, if it is to be accurate. 97.6% white. And then if we break it down, for example, on another identity characteristic, namely religion, obviously the one that instantly comes to mind when you hear things like this, especially because we'll be going over things to do with the Bataclan in a moment, would be Muslim. You're looking at about 0.4% in this area, according to the last census, with most people coming from a completely irreligious background or saying that they have no religion whatsoever. So that's why I want to exercise a bit of caution with jumping to conclusions, because ultimately what matters is that justice is done. That is what ultimately matters at the end of the day. We do not know anything, or at least I do not know anything. Now, that may have changed by the time that this episode goes out. So, just in case, this is why it's sometimes good to watch the video and stuff like that, ladies and gentlemen, if you can. If there has been any updates during the point of which there's any editing and cleanup and all of this stuff, pay attention on screen now, because if there are any updates, I'll be showing them on screen now, either like a clipping from a news article, whether the person who's been charged has been named or anything like that. Pay attention on screen now, because you'll be seeing those in the post-production if anything has broken in the time that this episode has been finished recording, or this episode was recording, and this episode being published. So you'll see that on screen now if anything has taken place. There is a problem in this area, though, ladies and gentlemen, and this is why, when we're talking about immigration, when we're talking about all of these other things, that's what it ultimately is always going to come back to in many ways, especially because of how much propaganda has been pushed through because of it, how much, of taxpayers' money has gone into trying convincing them that blatantly ideologically motivated initiatives against them, and that have been used to justify British replacement and ethnic cleansing and genocide by replacement in many areas in England, right? That's what this whole push has been for, right? It's for reverse colonization, it's for ethnic cleansing of Britain, and we really need to start taking it seriously. I'm going to bring this example back up that happened earlier on this year, February 13th, the day before Valentine's Day of this year. There was a altercation outside of a bar, in the high street, sorry, outside of seemingly two rival barbers in this town of Blackwood, mind you, so obviously very close to this area, where groups of rival Turkish people, it seemed, were brawling in the street. Now, I'm going to bring this up on screen for you, ladies and gentlemen. There's going to be no audio for this clip, just because there's a lot of wind noise in the background, and it'll be filtered out by the editing software anyway. But check this out on screen now. You can see here, there's this gang of what we'll go over in a moment is people who are, let's just say, not of native Welsh stock, and they're brawling in the street with weapons even. One of the people involved in this brawl, I believe, was actually stabbed, right? They've got crowbars, they're brawling in the street for whatever reason, but this is in a town very close to where Lainie lost her life. So we're seemingly seeing that these, ethnic, religious, whatever it may be, tribal, sectarian conflicts coming from other areas of the world, right, are manifesting in places in Wales where there is less than a 3%, what we would assume to be non-native population. And that is massively a cause for concern, like we saw in Operation Stovewood, where on that, pie chart, which you can go and find, just type in Operation Stovewood, probably on X, because, Google and all the other big tech guys will probably try to memory hole it, right? Like they've seemingly done with information on the Bataclan, which we'll go over in a little bit. You'll see that about 3% of the population made up about 2/3 of those child abuse and exploitation cases, right? I think it was about 323 that were analyzed in all, and you saw about 63% or 64% coming from Pakistanis, and they made up about 2.5 to 4% of the population, right? So we've got serious issues, it would seem. Now, that is not to say that that is what has happened in Lainie's case, but you can see now why people are speculating. You can see now why people are speculating, and we can see, like we saw with Harvey Wilgoose, for example, when later on his killer was named and people would turn right, like the Southport attack, where they tried to imply that it was a Welsh Christian choir boy, right, which couldn't be anything further from the truth, namely because he's not Welsh, he's not Christian, and, well, the choir boy seems to be unconfirmed, right? All other signs point to that also being not true. You can see now why people are speculating on this. To give you some more insight into around this incident, however, ladies and gentlemen, as reported in Wales Online and also in the South Wales Argus, right, there was eight men, I believe it was, or 7 men in this instance, that were in the dock at Newport Magistrates Court yesterday to confirm their names and addresses. They were accused of violent disorder in Blackwood High Street on February 13th, the incident that we just saw. Bave Hamed, I'll bring these up on screen because it'll be easier than me trying to read out their names, but you can also see them on screen then and see my terrible pronunciation. So you've got Bave Hamed, Shahab Husseini, Sadem Ebrahimi, Briar Muradi, Alan Karimi, Adnan Mohammed, and Kramanj Sadiq. Some of these of Cardiff, some of these of Blackwood, some of these of Pontypool, Oakdale. Question to be asked: why are they in Wales? It would seem. Why are they in Wales? It would seem they appeared on court March 17th. I'm not sure what the actual verdict was, but I mean everything is on camera. But I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the Wales Online, I'm just going to double check, they actually reported an additional person, I think. I just want to double check. Yeah, apparently there was another one there as they were released on bail ahead of the trial. Another one by the name of Omed Pirot, or Pirot, however you say it, of Pentwyn Mawr, was also released on bail. So there was 8 of them in all. The ones I just mentioned, right? Some of Cardiff, some of Oakdale, some of Pontypool, some of Blackwood, and then this one of Pentwyn Mawr was omitted for some reason from the South Wales Argus article. So at this point, you cannot necessarily blame people for speculating as to who may have committed this crime. Now, we have no end, and as you can imagine, the vast majority of criminals, at least from what I see being reported from just things that I see on Facebook, mainly from Wales Online about crime in the valleys. There was a drug bust that went down. I think it was about three people in all, just regular Welsh people that were involved in this massive multi-million, pound drug running scheme, right? You've got, robbers, you've got people being charged with assaults, right? There's reports coming in all the time of these things happening. So yeah, we have our own problems, obviously. It's weird then that lefties in particular will seemingly then use this to be like, oh yeah, well, we need to bring in all manner of other people from around the world who are committing all the same crimes, potentially even worse in many instances. Yes, even worse, because we have criminals here. It'd be like, no, can't we just deal with the criminals here and then stop any foreign criminals from coming in, or people that might have for various reasons, such as racial supremacy and religious supremacy? Can we maybe just keep them out? So we don't end up like Luton, so we don't end up like Rochdale, so we don't end up like Rotherham, so we don't end up like these places. That would actually be a good thing. That would actually be a good thing. But this is really, really tragic. Obviously, I can only imagine how the young brother's feeling. I can only imagine, the mother, receiving treatment in hospital, having tried to defend her daughter. Just, I'm imagining being a fly on the wall, because with the descriptions that we've been given of when he was waiting outside to going in and committing this heinous act, the only thing we can really hope for is, regardless of who, regardless of why, the justice is done. The justice is done, as with any crime. And that's the thing that people are really, really angry about, I think, for the most part, when they see the woke judiciary, when they see the blatant tootiness, when they see that not only are they lying about prisons being full, and that's why they need to release all of the dangerous criminals like murderers to put thought criminals in and stuff like that, but not only that, it's a blatant lie to start off with, right? With how that our politicians are doing everything they can seemingly to make our societies unsafe. Because you always remember, ladies and gentlemen, they want to push digital ID. They want to push digital ID under the guise of your safety, but it's going to be for your enslavement. That's what it's going to be for. Apologies, ladies and gentlemen. I know I'm tripping over my words quite a bit in this episode. Just not really so much on the ball today. Didn't exactly get a great night's sleep last night, but wanted to come back, and I know I had this episode come out earlier. I want to try and get this episode out on the same day. I want to try and make it a double bill if I can, particularly with regards to some of these stories which I want to get out there ASAP, which I think people could really do well to know about. So that's where we are with that case at the moment. Obviously, God rest Lainie's soul. Please do. Obviously, if you're this way inclined, please say a prayer for her, and please say a prayer for her family, obviously, especially her mother, and especially for her young brother, 8 years old, that had to witness this, or had to witness part of it at the very least. There's no words. There's absolutely no words. And please, at this moment in time, refrain from too much undue speculation, right? By all means, ask questions. Keep asking these questions. We should demand honesty, right? And we should demand justice be done, obviously. But let's wait until we actually get some information coming out on who this person was and maybe why they did it, right? And we'll see then if it is just a case of, disgusting native crime, or if it is potentially, as we're seeing again, the pattern emerging, right? The pattern has a long established history, right? If you look at England going back to the 50s and so on. Is this part of the same pattern that we've seen in England and we've seen in Scotland, we've seen in some of the big cities in Wales, but is now actually starting to affect some very, very small valleys towns? And obviously, if it is, obviously you should be concerned about that. Ladies and gentlemen, we should all be concerned about that. because it is showing that these problems that we've seen in England are coming for us and coming for all of us as well. And we should make, if that is the case, we should make that known with our local representatives the next time they try to tell us diversity is our strength and all of this stuff. And multiculturalism is a good thing, and mass immigration is a good thing, and all of this stuff, right? But let's wait. Let's wait until we know more. But God rest her soul, and let's just hope justice is done. Let's just hope justice is done. Speaking of justice being done, ladies and gentlemen, it does seem that a severe injustice has been done with the reporting of an incident which turned 10 years old this year, right? The atrocities that took place at the Eagles of Death metal concert at the Bataclan Theatre in Paris 10 years ago, where I believe it was around 98 people lost their lives? 89 people lost their lives, including Eagles of Death metal band merch manager Nick Alexander, after a bunch of terrorists broke in to the Bataclan Theatre and started shooting. They had suicide vests on. There was altercation with police. I believe one of them was actually killed when this suicide vest went off. And it's rather, the biggest thing that is scariest now about this is how little people have seemed to have learnt their lesson. You had Charlie Hebdo, right, at the Bataclan Theatre, and all the more it seems that we are just going to repeat the same mistakes over and over again, repeat the same ideological dogmas, despite not believe the evidence of our eyes and ears, right? Not believe the patterns we see emerging all across Europe. Obviously, France, Germany, Belgium and Austria, right? Poland is sort of like the one standout, as well as Hungary, right? That's why the EU, and that's why all of the other bureaucrats are trying to sanction them and fine them to deliberately make their societies more unsafe. It's quite funny how you see a lot of people who are deemed, or people who are given the sort of like the label of civic nationalists, right? Which is basically nationalism without the outright racial component and stuff like that, right? Which inevitably, when you come to any kind of looking at politics in kind of like a nationalist view or wherever, you will inevitably run up against the ethnicity question, right? And race is just a part of that. And there's no hatred involved in that. Race is just a part of that. Race is a part of people from where they are from, right? And that ties back to their ethnicity, that ties back to their heritage, that ties back to their ancestry, and that will point you to a place that they are native and indigenous to. And we're seeing that there's a propaganda drive to convince native Britons, right, Welsh, the English, the Scots, the Irish, that they actually don't exist and their society has always been multiracial and multicultural and all this stuff, when that is outright not true. And as we discussed in the last episode, you're looking at England, or looking at the United Kingdom as a whole, you only need to go back to the 50s to see that that is not true. Right? You only need to go back to 1950 to have that myth dispelled. Never mind 1050, right? Never mind 50 AD. You only need to go back about, again, 80, 70 years to have that myth dispelled. But to try and push these narratives, our government has consistently covered up crimes that have been committed for racial and religious reasons and so on. And it does seem that that was done, at least in some capacity, with regard to the Bataclan incident. There have been reports resurfacing recently relating back to articles that were published at the time, right? So about a year, about 8 or so months later. For example, this one in the Daily Mail, the allegations that the French government suppressed gruesome torture of Bataclan victims, as official inquiry was told that some were viewer discretion and listener discretion advised you, ladies and gentlemen. If you're listening on YouTube or watching on YouTube, you're probably going to be hearing a lot of muted segment in this next bit. So maybe you want to go listen on Rumble or Spotify or Amazon Music if you want to get the full uncensored version. Official inquiry is told some were and had their eyes out by the ISIS killers. Victims of the terror attacks were tortured by ISIS, inquiry hears. Policemen on the scene of the nightclub vomited when they saw the victims. Prosecutors cast doubt on claims saying that no knives were found. 89 people died at the Bataclan in total on the attack last November. So they've alleged that there's been severe, and we're talking very severe atrocities, ladies and gentlemen, that were deliberately covered up for whatever reason, usually to push political propaganda and stuff like that, in the aftermath, particularly what happened on the second floor. Particularly what happened on the second floor of the Bataclan Theatre. What people have been saying on X, I'm not sure how much of these have been corroborated, but there's this post from Amy Meck, for example, been quite vocal on the Islamic takeover of certain parts of America in particular. I'm going to show you this post on screen now, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a couple more articles to read through to give you an insight into what's being said about this incident now. So on the second floor, particularly, apparently there's been more slaughtered than was actually reported, and potentially even 683 maimed in the name of Allah. You had victims shoved down their throats while still alive. You had eyes out with fingers and gun barrels left empty and bleeding. Pregnant women stabbed in the womb. One baby out and left partially decapitated. Heads, necks with shrapnel and broken bottles. Women were apparently post-mortem. Their bodies were in pools of blood. And then on the second floor, police found bodies stacked like firewood, hanging from chandeliers, limbs twisted in death poses, not from bullets, from knives and hands. And these were not quick kills, but a chaotic slaughterhouse where bodies were stacked like firewood. There's one survivor, which is apparently a sealed testimony. They laughed while cutting. They said, "This is for Syria." One filmed it on a GoPro because ISIS wanted trophies, and there's been allegations now that footage like this has been used in ISIS propaganda and recruitment videos. There were 0 knives recovered, but slash wounds on 41 bodies. A DNA of 3 attackers was found inside victims' wounds, where they used bare hands. And there's now allegations that France buried this to protect cohesion, to protect the narrative that diversity and multiculturalism is our strength, and all of these things, which you'd be hard pressed to say that last part hasn't been the case, even if some of these claims have either been over embellished or they're outright false, right? What we saw on October the 7th gives us an indicator of the kind of stuff that these people will do, right? The kind of animalistic bloodlust, right, that these people often find themselves getting caught up in. We've seen, scaled back atrocities of this with the gangs. Obviously, people haven't lost their lives and they haven't had their bodies defiled and stuff like that, but we have instances of things happening in the UK, the easiest one to point to being the case of Charlene Downs, who there's been several media articles reporting on her that she was ground up and made into kebab meat. She was murdered, ground up, and made into kebab meat by her disgusting foreign gang. So the question is now, and this is why, when you see how politicized the media has become, when you see how much foreign governments waging war on ours, but our own governments have turned on us as well for whatever reason, because they hate us, and they're now doing seemingly what they can to protect the worst of jihadi terrorists, to protect the narrative. What do we believe? What do we believe? Says a lot when we get onto in a moment, when the lead singer, I believe it was, of Eagles of Death Metal, what's his name, Jesse Hughes, he apologized for what he said and then later went on to retract that apology, insinuating that the security that night could have been in on it, right? Insinuating that the security that night could have been in on it, and he was condemned by the French authorities, as far as I know, and he issued an apology, which he later retracted, right? An extract from that article, by the way, from the Rolling Stone, when he was giving an interview with the Fox Business Network last November, so that would have been straight away seemingly after the incident, because this article was published in Rolling Stone March 10th, 2016, so last November would have been the November the attacks took place. Hughes said he felt that something was amiss. When he first arrived at the venue and noted the security guard for the backstage area didn't look at him. He's quoted to have said, "I immediately went to the promoter and said, 'Who is that guy? I want to put another dude on.' And the promoter goes, 'Well, some of the other guards aren't here yet.' And eventually he found that 6 or so wouldn't show up at all. Now, there's also allegations that the doors were propped open, right? Insinuating that people knew about it. They left the doors open so these terrorists could come in, indicating that they would have had prior knowledge of it. When asked why the guards didn't arrive, Hughes didn't make an official statement out of respect for the police investigating, but he continued, "It seems rather obvious that they had a reason not to show up." Obviously, 89 people were killed, right? Obviously, there's allegations that potentially even more were killed on the second floor, and the authorities covered it up. And then, this is what he then said, which I think most people at this point would be much in agreement with. He slammed the country's strict control laws on one thing in particular and highlighted what most people can say is just an incontrovertible fact. It's the biggest thing when it comes down to the gun control debate, ladies and gentlemen, is that things like this will always be resolved by guns one way or another. So in this incident with the Bataclan and many other things, right, it's either going to be resolved with a police officer, usually a male, turning up with a gun and ending the assailant's life if it can't be ended, if the confrontation can't be ended in a non-violent way. Or what has also happened in the past is an assailant or terrorist or whoever it is will turn the gun on himself or herself, right? Either way, it's ended with guns. And that's what he was basically pointing out. He said, "Did your French gun control stop a single person from dying at the Bataclan? If anyone can answer yes, I'd like to hear it, because I don't think so. I think the only thing that it stopped was some of the bravest men I've ever seen in my life charging." The only thing that stopped it, let me rephrase because I got that wrong. "I think the only thing that stopped it, i.e. the Bataclan attack, was some of the bravest men I've ever seen in my life charging head first into the face of death with their firearms." And that's exactly what we should be talking about in many instances where we're seeing now. James McMurdoch, when he had an Amazon delivery driver invade his home. It's on him to charge what could be into the face of death. And that's where we need to start taking this now, ladies and gentlemen, because of the instances we've seen. And we've seen how many instances the media will cover it up and try to obfuscate in all of these things. What you've done, as he pointed out, is with these strict gun control laws and all of these things, you've just hamstrung good people from defending themselves. That's all you've done. And you've emboldened criminals who will do the worst things, because they know the odds are the person's not going to have a gun on them to defend themselves and end your life, right? Because the government is taking care of that. And then when these things do inevitably come, like what happened with Lainie Williams, for example, what happened? It was armed police that turned up at the house. Funny that. Guns are quite clearly effective, right? Because when it's in the police capacity and they're turning up to deal with what they suspect is a violent murderer, they'll turn up and they'll have guns trained on the person, and they won't hesitate, if they feel they need to end the person's life. But by that point, it's too late. By that point, it is too late. And a great cruelty to the innocent has been done by depriving them of that means to defend themselves in that moment. He's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. So there's other things as well. There's another article here from the International Business Times. French government suppressed reports of Bataclan's victims' castration torture. So again, some of the torture was said to include eyes being gouged out, disembowelment, men who were castrated and had their testicles shoved in their mouths, and women who were stabbed in the genitals. The committee heard the torture was filmed for Islamic State propaganda. The details were given 14 hours of the details revealed during 14 hours of testimony given about the Paris attacks on the 21st of March. They were only released to the public on 5th of July. The witnesses said the acts took place on the second floor of the theatre after 3 terrorists took concert goers who were watching the band Eagles of Death Metal hostage. The investigator told the inquiry, "After the assault, we were with colleagues at the Passage Saint-Pierre Amelot when I saw weeping from one of our colleagues who came outside to vomit. He told us what he had seen. So the reason, again, a lot of people are speculating about this now is, again, you're having multiple corroborated reports of this happening, ladies and gentlemen. Despite what the Paris and the French authorities have gone on to say, in fact, that now the Muslim population has got to about 1/5, I believe, of the country, France is in serious danger of falling again to another type of foreign imperialistic fascist power. That's what we're seeing now. So it's going to be very, very similar. It's going to be very, very similar to what we would have seen in World War II, for example, when they were taken over. It was just by a German power in that instance. Now they're getting taken over by whatever brand of Islam is going to take them over. And he told us what we had seen. The investigator said that some of the bodies had also been beheaded. These claims were refuted by prosecutors who said no sharp knives were found at the scene. Who's to say it could have been on the assailants? Who's to say they couldn't have been blown to pieces when one of them went up in their suicide vest, right? But also, as Amy pointed out, if this is to be correct, there was shrapnel and broken bottles that were used. If that is correct. So maybe they didn't have sharp knives. Doesn't necessarily mean that it didn't happen. And that the mutilations were caused by the detonation of explosive devices containing nails, bolts, shrapnel, and rapid gunfire. Either way, more than enough to say, all right, we don't want anything to do with these people anymore, right? We don't have anything to gain via further interaction with these people. We want them gone. But the French authorities will seemingly never say that. Apparently, the president of the committee, Georges Fenech, heard that a father had been told whilst visiting his son's body at the morgue that the right side of his face, i.e. the face of his son's body, was unrecognizable because terrorists had punctured his eye and sliced down the right-hand side of his face. The report states, quote, "On the causes of the death of my son at the Forensic Institute in Paris, I was told, and what a shock it was for me in that moment, they had cut off his testicles, put them in his mouth, and he was disemboweled. When I saw him behind glass, lying on a table, a white shroud covering him up to the neck, a psychologist was with me. He said, 'This is the only presentable part, your son's left profile.' I found that he had no right eye. I was informed that they had punctured his eye and sliced down the right side of his face, where there was a very large hematoma that we could all see. And asked how the man's body parts ended up in his mouth, the prosecutor replied, 'I do not have that information.' So there's a lot of speculation at the moment as to what happened, but even the things that we do know, even the things that we can know, seemingly with certainty, should be more than enough reason say the people that support this and the people that support the ideology that spawned this, right, many of whom are distinctly not French and have been let in by a disgusting, treasonous oversight committee, if you will, that's called the EU, and has exposed all of the countries within it to this ever-growing carnivorous cancer. The thing is, as I said in that previous episode, ladies and gentlemen, the thing that people forget seemingly about that first letter of coexist is that letter wants to eat all the others. Right? And yeah, we can have conversations about other religions and stuff like that, and religion as a whole, yes. But I think you're seeing, for all the talk of Islam is a religion of peace and yada, 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 and all of this stuff, you're seeing the experiment being run in real time. You are seeing the results of the experiment every single day. And as the popular saying goes, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Maybe we should be taking a different tack. Maybe the propaganda, or maybe the slogans that we've been using, multiculturalism, diversity is our strength, coexist, all of that stuff, maybe it's not working. Maybe it's not working. And we need to push for different solutions. namely at this point now Britain, all of Europe, it would seem, and many instances or many places in America as well, and Canada especially, Japan, need to push, and this is good news because Japan, despite the fact we just went over what the communist leader said, Japan has now seemingly one of the most right-wing leaders in recent memory, especially with regards to immigration, to push for remigration. Because this is an imported problem. And that's just the reality. It's an unfortunate reality, but it just is what is. It's not going to get any better if we keep doing the same thing. It's not going to get any better if we keep voting in the same way. So we need to change. We need to change. Fundamentally, nothing else changes until our attitude, our outlook changes at a fundamental level. That is when things are going to change. And we can do that whilst exercising very strict penalty on our own and acknowledging the evils that we commit, which became very apparent in the case of a nursery worker, 18 years old, by the name of Thomas Waller, who has now been jailed only for 10 years, which is an absolute travesty, for using his position to abuse children as young as 3, whilst he was working in a nursery. I actually think I talked about DBSs and all of my stuff in the conversation with Justine Winter as well, about how the bigwigs don't need like DBSs and all of this stuff. I should think, was he, DBS check, all of this stuff that you got to go through to work with children. Nothing was able to catch this guy working through the net. Quite clearly, you might have to look at some other systems as well, right? Again, I've seen a lot of people, and rightfully so, pointing out that if you're like a, young man who, wants to work in like a nursery kind of environment, many people are saying that that's very suspect in and of itself, right? Especially because around these, ages, children need that kind of like nurturing figure for the most part, and they're going to get that the best from a woman with good maternal instinct, right? Ooh, look at me, gender stereotyping, or sex stereotyping. But this guy has now been jailed for only 10 years for using his position to abuse children as young as 3. Obviously 10 years, nowhere near enough. The absolute minimum should be life in prison without any possibility of parole, right? This would be a great example, again, to get the gallows back out. Question is whether we trust our current government with the authority to do that, right? We saw in Parliament in the last episode when Rupert Lowe brought up the reintroduction, the idea to reintroduce the death penalty for both foreign and domestic criminals, right? That there was this outcry from the benches of admonishment, right? They're happy to do it for the elderly with euthanasia. They're happy to do it for the unborn, right? All of these things that are being done under the guise of quote-unquote progressivism or whatever, but not for the worst criminals. It would seem funny enough, the lefties then who want to try and get one over in any way on the quote-unquote far right or whatever, literally say, look, they're not going to cover this case because he's white and all of this stuff. He's not the right race. He's British, so they're not going to cover it. They're going to try and cover or whatever. Not the case. You'll see pretty much every commentator or every prominent right-wing figure calling this out, and if not calling for this guy's lifelong imprisonment, calling for his death, right? Calling for his public execution, as they will do in all cases when this happens. So you're not getting one over on the right wing whatsoever by then thinking you've got a dunk on this one, right? When now that he's 18, a little bit more information on this guy. He was sentenced to 15 years for one boy and inciting both boys to engage in sexual activity. So we had a young John Money on our hands. This disgusting, disgusting individual. He also had photos of one victim on his phone. He will serve 10 years in youth custody and 5 years on license. So he's only doing 60% of his time in a custody facility, right? He's only doing 60% of his time, it would seem, or 66% of his time in an actual custodial facility. And then for the next 5 years, right? So he's just been sentenced in 2035, right? If there's any British around by then. he's going to be out on license, and, well, we might as well interpret that as a license to reoffend, shouldn't we? But we shall see. We shall see. But again, it's nowhere near. It's nowhere near enough, right? The minimum, absolute minimum, is life in prison. But again, people, it's a miracle, it seems, that he was actually sentenced to prison in the first place. That is an indictment on our judicial system as a whole, right? They wouldn't give any license terms or whatever, it would seem, to people who posted things on social media. They rejected Lucy Connolly's appeal. I believe they rejected Wayne O'Rourke's appeal as well. But they make this guy only do 66% of his time in an actual facility. There's no words. There's absolutely no words. And it just goes to show, ladies and gentlemen, I'll bring his thing up on screen now. Because, again, I always do this with people that have, again, burned this guy's... Well, actually, it'd be better for every single one of them, foreign and otherwise, to simply be, you know, thrown away into the annals of history and forgotten about, right? But this is the guy in question, right? Absolutely, absolutely disgusting human being. And it's hard to say that justice has been done for his victims. It's very, very hard to say that justice has been done. They're going to have to battle this and live with this for the rest of their lives, grow up with it, trying to manage it, not to mention the stress that's going to put on the family, right? Should be investigating how he was able to do this, it would seem, why there wasn't more stringent, you know, protocols in place to maybe identify this before he had started. You got to think, surely there would have been some signs, right? Or surely there would have been some troubling signs. Just purely on the fact that he's 18, and it's very uncommon, at least it would seem for me at least, to want to work in a nursery with children. So that's a, you know, more female-dominated field for a reason. And obviously doesn't mean to say that, you know, women can't do disgusting crimes of this magnitude as well. We've seen that, obviously. Evil comes in all different shapes, sizes, sexes, and colours. The mother, however, has, I believe, come out and said some, again, it's kind of hard to... Or is there some other victims? Let me just double check. Here we go, yeah. So in a victim impact statement, one of the victim's mothers, one of the children's mothers, I thought this was initially his mother, but it's not his mother. I can't imagine what she's going through as well at the moment. You know, with the revelations that this is what you've raised, and again, what was potentially the parents' part in it. What was it? You know, you can't ask questions. What was his upbringing like? You know, what things could have led to this so that these things can't happen again? But I'll tell you what, 10 years is not justice. She told Guildford Crown Court, "I could not believe what I was hearing. I wanted to have misheard him or misunderstood. He did not know that what had happened was wrong, but he knew it was different and wanted to share it," presumably referring to one of her young boys, right? Who, again, that's the thing. You have to be careful with people who you put in these positions, the positions that Waller was in, because you can't expect the children to know right from wrong in this instance, to know what's normal and what's not. They don't have that life experience yet. She said, "My son is a kind, trusting boy, and this man took advantage of that innocence and abused it." She said it was horrific that her beautiful, brave young son had questioned his own accountability of being by Waller, who is now 18. Should never be something that a kid has to think about. You know what I mean? Should never, ever be something that a kid has to think about. She said Waller created the opportunity to abuse her son and had deliberately befriended him. He had skills to build a rapport with children and take advantage of it. It was premeditated and calculated. We do not know what the long-term impact on our son will be. I don't think he will forget what was done to him. It's, yeah. I suppose you're only going to know about this now when, you know, things may manifest much later on in life. I'm no psychologist, but I would imagine that it's probably going to be repressed. You know, brain is automatically probably going to go into some kind of defensive mechanism, right? And it probably won't manifest until a little bit later on in life, when, again, maybe it unconsciously influences certain behavioral changes. Maybe it makes the son more antisocial, and that's a sign which you can use to then be like, okay, this is the time we need to open this box. You know, there's going to be a right time to open that box, right? And really confront it. And I would strongly recommend, even you guys might have somebody that's dealt with similar or dealt with this kind of stuff, or maybe this has been something that's happened to you and you've been through it. Maybe you can give me a little bit of extra insight into this next part. But one story which really showed me, or was really insightful for me when I first heard it, and it's often used as a way to discredit the church and discredit Christianity unfairly, the actions of the priest, right? The actions of the priests. And we've seen that there's been successive or scandals in the past that have been covered up, right? Child abuse scandals that have been covered up in the Catholic Church, within other churches as well, it would seem. Previous Archbishop of Canterbury knew about child abuse that had happened and did not report it. I believe for about 20 or more years he did not report it. Father Dan Rehill, who I believe is in the Diocese or Archdiocese of Tennessee, he's been on Michael Knowles' show. He's been on, I believe, Lila Rose's show as well. He's been on a couple of podcasts, and he was actually abused by a priest when he was, I can't remember exactly how old he was, but when he was a child, he was abused by a priest. And obviously it drove him away from the church for a long time. But then when he came back, he ended up, as you'll know, he became a priest, and I believe he has quite a formidable online presence now, and he has a lot of great stories about, Catholic Church and about theology and about, Christianity and all of these things, right? He's actually the exorcist of the Diocese of Tennessee as well, I believe. And yeah, it's a tremendous story about how really tremendous evil can be used to then make good things. And it would be a testament to the power of God that there's no evil that he could not turn to good in some way. I know that's easy for anybody to say. I know that's extremely easy for anybody to say, and it often comes across as hollow words. Which is why I'll link one of the conversations where I know Dan Rehill has actually talked about this. I believe the one where he's talked about it the most, and talked about how he actually used that story when talking with a bunch of hardened male criminals in a prison to really reach them with the message of Christ, after a keynote speaker dropped out and he had to go up and make this speech. And he gave the speech about the prodigal son and used his experience talking about when he was, I believe he was 8 years old, if I'm not mistaken. I might have that detail slightly wrong. Explained, when I was this age, this happened to me and it drove me away for a long time. But then in his experience, it was Mother Mary that brought him back to it. And when in his capacity took Christ in with him, he was able to then overcome that. But not only that, went and became, right, didn't scorn the church, didn't scorn Christianity, didn't scorn Christ or anything like that, went and became a priest himself, right? And when he was giving the speech, he recounts how the tears were streaming down these hardened criminals' faces because a lot of their criminality and the things that they were locked up for started with being abused themselves, often within their own families. I suppose the biggest thing with that, I lost my train of thought there for a moment. That's why I paused the recording and you'll see a little jump cut. The biggest thing with that then is that might provide some useful advice. Maybe, again, it might not be for another 5, 10, 15 years that, the church has been around for over about 2,000 years, right? Nearly 2,000 years the church has been around for, right? So maybe that would be valuable for whether it's you, whether it's somebody you know, whether it's these young children that will have these battles in the future. and that could be used to take them down a really bad path. Evil forces at play could be used to take them down a really, really bad path in their adulthood. Maybe get them hooked on drugs, hooked on a life of crime, get them behind bars themselves. Whatever evil things they might go on to do. We can hope that they won't. Right? Or, depending on the way that they react to it, and depending on possibly what the parents do, and I hope it's coming across that I'm saying this with as much empathy and care as possible, that maybe the way that Father Dan Rehill approached this issue and handled this issue could be a valuable way that these families that have been affected by Waller, these families that have been affected by gangs, these families that have been affected by all of these evil things all across the world can approach these problems. And hopefully, the power of the Almighty turn what is, in many people's eyes, and, rightfully so, possibly the worst evil that could be committed outside of, say, murder, and turn it into a good in the ways that our brains could never conceive. Maybe it's worth a shot. Now, ladies and gentlemen, finishing off today, we've got a couple more things to go through. Speaking of questions we seemingly have to ask now, because there's been some serious problems with the police force, as you'll know. And I think we just need... Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, I should check on my phone. Then we need to look up potentially who's making up more and more of our police force now. There have been 2 cases which have come to light recently for me. I didn't know about these. One is obviously a lot more serious than the other. But important cases nonetheless. One of them is the count of a British Pakistani police officer, and we're going to start off with the most severe of the 2 cases, who was convicted of 15 counts of assault against a 7-year-old girl over 8 years, leading to an 18-year prison sentence. And this was referenced in a post where the post itself referenced a report, right? Because he also phoned a 14-year-old girl witness in a case he was dealing with and asked her to go on a date with him. The post references a report that I'm not able to access at this present moment in time because I believe it's under Freedom of Information Act request. And I don't really know how to put those in, and I don't know if I have the authority really to put those in, because obviously I'm just a person talking into a microphone. I'm not necessarily an accredited journalist or anything like that. A secret Met police report found that Pakistani police are 10 times more likely to be corrupt. It didn't mention how likely, obviously, they are to be, child abusers. But when you see this, ladies and gentlemen, there've been some reporting on it. I'm surprised this hasn't been, memory hole a lot more than it actually was. It was quite difficult to find anything on this case initially, but it was the case in January of 2012, 25th of January. You can find the Duncan Lewis legal. So Duncan Lewis solicitors have got a file, I believe, about this. The judge described the police officer's crimes amongst the most despicable they had ever heard. The 43-year-old police officer was fired from Thames Valley Police following being disciplined for threatening those who had complained about him. In fact, bear with me 2 seconds, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm going to bring this up on screen. There we go. He also called a 14-year-old witness in an investigation he had taken charge of and asked her out on a date. Judge Francis Sheridan heard how police officer Mohammed Younas had a 7-year-old girl and continued abusing her over an 8-year period. Regardless of his dismissal, the judge heard that the frequency of Mr. Younas's abuse of the young girl increased. Mr. Younas attacked the girl and forced another child to engage in activity. He denied 15 counts of assault and at Aylesbury Crown Court, yet was found by the jury to be guilty. The court heard how Mr. Younas, originally from Pakistan, suffered a nervous breakdown and this had affected his work as a police officer. You think, why wasn't he removed from, removed from the force sooner? Because it was during his nervous breakdown that the sexual abuse of the girl began and continued until the girl's 15th birthday. Surely someone would have noticed. But then again, people were scared of saying anything because they would be deemed as racist, wouldn't they, ladies and gentlemen? They would be scared of saying anything because they'd be deemed as racist. In addition to serving an 18-year prison term, which is nowhere near enough, obviously, Mr. Younas received a offences prevention order, effectively banning him from making unsupervised communication or contact with children under the age of 16 years. Mr. Younas was indefinitely listed. Why would he even be allowed to make contact with them, assuming outside of his own family or whatever, supervised anyway? Mr. Younas was indefinitely listed on the sex offenders register and was handed a restraining order to prevent him from contacting his victims. Now, we know how effective a restraining order is, ladies and gentlemen. You know, a piece of paper that may not even be in material existence in the first place. It might just be a decree from a judge. Yeah, that's really stops criminals from going and doing and violating restraining orders, doesn't it? Yep, really stops them. Really stops them if, you know, he was to turn up at the house of a victim, wanting to make good on past threats or make good on promises he made to himself in jail or whatever. Obviously, I'm speculating now, but obviously this person was not well. And really, A, what he's still doing in the country. B, should he really have ever been here? Did we really have anything to gain from immigration from this area of the world, ladies and gentlemen? If you ask me, the answer would be no. However, one thing that was reported on is quite interesting, and you'll be finding this down below. It's not the official report. It's not the official report, but it's still interesting. I've had to go to The Guardian for this, ladies and gentlemen, because it's the only place I can find it. Secret report brands Muslim police as corrupt. I do wonder why. So I'm going to bring this up on screen in a moment, ladies and gentlemen. Fury over internal Met study, which says Asians need special training. Now, I don't think they're necessarily referring to Koreans, or they're referring to Japanese, or they're referring to any of these others, right? I think they're referring to a certain brand of Asian. A secret, and this was in 2006, by the way. This was in 2006. A secret high-level Metropolitan Police report has concluded that Muslim officers are more likely to become corrupt than white officers because of their cultural and family backgrounds. Now, you're instantly seeing here, ladies and gentlemen, articles on screen if you want to look at it. The conflation between religion and race straight off the bat, because, you know, you could be Muslim and you could be white, right? But it's indicating here that, at least in British society, being a Muslim does present serious challenges because, again, they are required to be more loyal to the Ummah than to be to the others, to the kafir, right? And as a result, that's going to impact on their ability to administer justice, right? That's why you see a lot of these preferential treatments or preferential even for criminals when they go out and riot outside of police stations, because they have to be more loyal to the Ummah than they are to their communities if they are in communities where they are not the Ummah, right? But here, you're seeing here not only the religious problems, but also then, because Islam is an imported problem from these areas of the world, right? That yes, race is then going to be a factor. Pardon me. Race is then going to be a factor as well, which is a really serious concern that we really have to start taking seriously now. The document, which has been seen by The Guardian, has caused outrage among ethnic minorities within the force, who have labelled it as racist and proof that there is a gulf in understanding between the police force and the wider Muslim community. The document was written as an attempt to investigate why complaints of misconduct against Asian officers are 10 times higher than their white colleagues. Did you hear about this at the time, ladies and gentlemen? No, it would have been shouted down as racist. It would have been shouted down as all of these things when they're just observing the way that things are, it would seem. And when you see how things have turned out in many areas when more and more of these people have turned up, right, it lends a lot of credibility to the findings at the time that would have been shot down as racist and all of these things, despite the fact that obviously A, Muslim is not a race, and B, the stats just are what they are. You're going to call stats racist, you might as well call, anything racist, and then obviously then racism loses its meaning entirely. It's just used as a way to shout down and obfuscate away from the truth. That's what it's used for. The main conclusions of the study, commissioned by the Directorate of Professional Standards and written by an Asian detective inspector, said Asian officers, and in particular Pakistani Muslim officers, are under greater pressure from the family, the extended family, and their community against that of their white colleagues to engage in activity that might lead to misconduct or criminality. So it's outright admitting, ladies and gentlemen, that these people from these areas of the world, and because of the religion that they follow, are having their ability to administer justice, British law and justice, because of their family, because of religious obligations, right? And their community. Yet, seemingly, it's fine when they do it. We've got to double down on fighting Islamophobia when they do it. It's all of these things when they do it. And if we call it out, we are deemed as racist, Islamophobic, all of these things. But yet, if these people need special anti-corruption training, which was considered at the time, maybe we'd just be better with not having them in the police force. Even better, it would seem, maybe we'd just be better not having them in the country. It's not, however, just these people who, they outright say again, report argued that British Pakistanis live in a cash culture in which assisting your extended family, i.e. the Ummah, is considered a duty, and in an environment which large amounts of money are loaned between relatives and friends. Maybe these people are just not meant to be trusted. And more to that effect was published in a report from the Met Police into not a Pakistani Muslim officer, but DS Nonso Anidi, a Nigerian officer, who fulfilled his own self-fulfilling stereotype in rather hilarious fashion, because he accused another officer or an inspector of calling him a dodgy Nigerian and saying that he was being racist, right? That was the allegation. The allegation that was, and I'll link the report down below. I've read parts of it. I have not read it in full, but it gives the full breakdown of everything. The allegations were, being a member of the Metropolitan Police Service, in an email dated 5th of May 2023, DS Anidi did an act namely falsely stating that Inspector Thompson called him a dodgy Nigerian. And the allegations are that this act was dishonest, this act had the tendency to pervert an employment grievance procedure, and DS Anidi intended that the employment grievance procedure should be perverted by the act. And the background of it was that Inspector Thompson had newly become DS Anidi's line manager, and there was some confusion about overtime. Namely then resulting in Inspector Thompson, I have not read the full report yet, but it'll be linked down below. It secretly recorded a conversation with DS Anidi, the first time he'd ever done so, because there was confusions about overtime, and apparently DS Anidi was not answering his questions about the overtime, cleanly and easy to understand, right? And then, as a result of that, they then said, or DS Anidi responded to an email from Inspector Lloyd, another inspector, Inspector Lloyd, saying, "We also discussed about Mr. Thompson calling me dodgy and made reference to my nationality." And what later come out, ladies and gentlemen, and this is why this is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and why, again, how many anecdotes do you need before it becomes empirical evidence? Not only that, how much empirical evidence do you need before you can then make a decision on what to do? The summary of the misconduct hearing outcome in which DS Nonso Anidi was concerned, this is from 27th to 30th of October this year. The summary is that he answered allegations that this conduct amounted to breaches of the standards of professional behaviour in respect of honesty and integrity and discreditable conduct. The panel found that DS Nonso Anidi breached the standards of professional behaviour in relation to honesty and integrity and discreditable conduct, These breaches amounted to gross misconduct. DS Nonso Anidi was dismissed without notice and will now be added to the public barred list held by the College of Policing. The rather hilarious thing about this, ladies and gentlemen, hilarious for all the wrong reasons, and why in the Standard, the London Standard, Black Met officer lied about being called Dodgy Nigerian in race claim, right? He's appealing the decision, so we shall see. But if this is upheld, the person who tried to get another person, i.e. his inspector, in trouble for allegedly calling him a dodgy Nigerian, at least in the present verdict that we have, never called him, in fact, a dodgy Nigerian, and so fulfilled the stereotype, it would seem, or fulfilled his own self-fulfilling prophecy with regards to police officers of this descent by making himself out to be a dodgy Nigerian. How much more... This one's kind of a funny story, but there's plenty of not-so-funny stories. There's plenty of not-so-funny stories, like Mohammed Younas. My question, ladies and gentlemen, I suppose, is at what point, with the levels of immigration that we've had, with the levels of all these things that we've had, what point do all of the stories, all of the anecdotes, all of the empirical evidence, like Operation Stovewood and all of these other inquiries and so on, at what point do we have to start looking at these things as part of the collective of the immigration push that has been foisted on us, really ever since the end of the Second World War, and admit that for so long there's been so much money poured into propaganda and all of these things that we have been had for political reasons, right? They wanted foreign voting blocs. They wanted to destroy our societies. They wanted to destroy national sovereignty. They wanted to destroy nation states in the West, the strong nation powers. They wanted to destroy the peoples because that's how they were going to destroy the nation state. They wanted to implant it with politically useful third worlders to provide the action, the unrest, to then get what populace would remain to push through the initiatives that they wanted, like digital ID and all of this stuff. At what point now, especially looking at really at least the last 15 to 30 years, going back to Blair even, at what point now do we have to start looking at this as kind of like a just collective immigration problem? And just seeing that immigration has never really benefited Britain and that something needs to be done about it. The reality is, you go back to the 50s, you didn't have police officers named Mohammed Younas, a 7-year-old until she was 15 over 8 years, didn't have all these accusations of racism, didn't have all of these things, these diversity programs, and didn't have quote-unquote dodgy Nigerians, right, making accusations of racism, seemingly at the very least at the moment false accusations of racism. You had high trust, you had relatively low crime, homogeneous, understanding, just societies. Something has changed in that time which has completely inverted and destroyed all of that. And ultimately, and until we resolve that, I can't see any of these other problems getting resolved. And that'll do it for today. Don't know how good this episode's going to be, but I'll put it out anyway. Thank you very much for watching, listening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you found it useful. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you have a fantastic morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you for watching. Hwyl fawr. We'll see you next time. Hopefully this episode will be out on the 15th, but if not, it'll be out on the 16th. But you have a tremendous day now, and evening, night, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. And we'll catch up with you again soon. Godspeed.